Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. So today we've got the launch of a new mini-series, and today we're going to kick that off with the first part of that mini-series. So this is kind of a branch off on the topic, the American Troubles, that we've talked about a couple of times before. We've had a podcast on it, a YouTube video on this subject, and now we're going to be talking about part 3, which will branch off into its own series on escape and concealment. So, as everyone knows, usually we like to start off with the why, or the mentality or philosophy behind why we're trying to talk about this topic. But this time around, we're going to start off with a disclaimer. So, of course, we have to have this kind of disclaimer on this topic because this is kind of a little bit more gray area than we have talked about before. So let me just go ahead and read this out. So, this information is provided only for legal, lawful use. The SERE project cannot be held liable for any misuse of this information. Currently, the concept of sharing knowledge is a constitutionally protected right, and as such, no further reason is needed to explain why we are sharing this information. In short, the First Amendment covers our ability to talk about this information. There is no such thing as protected information. The only thing that kind of comes close to this is the concept of classified information, but once again, nothing in this series will be classified. None of this information will be proprietary, and none of this information will be derived from any federal, state, or governmental force. This is all just our own private knowledge and experience gained over years of dealing with this stuff in the field. So, despite the fact that we have the disclaimer, we have to have another one. The disclaimer to the disclaimer. Essentially, what we mean is don't be stupid, don't break laws. Our constitutionally protected rights are infringed on every day by various groups, agencies, and entities, so we fully expect that certain entities will attempt to stop us from sharing this information. But if they do, they're going to have to take down every other lock sport enthusiast in the U.S. Lockpicking as a hobby is very large in the United States and around the world, to be honest, and there really aren't that many laws that cover it, especially what we're going to talk about today, which is illegal restraints. So I know that's kind of boring. I know that people really don't like it when we have to do disclaimers, but honestly, to ensure the survivability of this video series, we have to kind of put this disclaimer in there to say that, look, this is for illegal restraints. I will caveat that and say that this is the third time we have filmed this. We have 37 slides of the why behind this sort of project, but we decided not really to go down that road and just simply say, look, it's our right to talk about this stuff. So we're going to talk about it because we think it's information that people need to know, and we're just going to leave it at that. Now, when we talk about the concept of restraint escape, we really jump to the only field and the only doctrine and the only subject area in the world that really talks about this sort of thing from a practical standpoint. Sure, as we mentioned, the whole lock sport entity is great, and the whole lock-picking hobby is great, but to be honest, that hobby doesn't really encompass too many people talking about restraint escape. And that's sort of what we're kind of gearing towards today, which is restraint escape. Really, the only thing that talks about, someone's got you locked up, be it a terrorist or a foreign government or something like that. Someone's got you locked up, they've got you tied down. How do you get out of that and get back home? Well, there's one field of study that is specifically meant for that, and that's SERE, the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape doctrine from the U.S. military. All branches have some version of this. There's all different kinds of courses, from the 2-hour-long online course that everybody has to take before they deploy, to the actual several day long, like the week-long course that actually puts a lot of this stuff into practice. Now, there are also a lot of people out there who talk about restraint escape, and they build like survival kits, like SERE kits. Like, Google the term SERE kit and you will find a lot of companies out there, a lot of small companies out there that are building these SERE kits with all kinds of little goodies inside them to help get you out of an illegal restraint situation. Now, that's great, and we think that a lot of these, private companies doing this sort of thing, this technology would not be available to civilians were it not for private civilian companies coming up with this stuff. But we also have to remember that SERE as a concept isn't quite the same as escaping from a restraint situation as a civilian. So let's talk about that for a little bit. And I know, pretty text-heavy slide, but in short, SERE assumes a lot of factors that are not exactly applicable to civilians. So I'll just go down the list here. First of all, SERE assumes that a nation state will use every possible resource to recover a single person. So in other words, in the concept of SERE, the whole overarching doctrine is there will be a nation helping you. Where an entire military group, an entire military division, an entire command has been set up specifically for recovering personnel, right? We have satellites in space that are meant specifically for helping our, downed aviators, lost troops, captured soldiers and whatnot, get back to civilian, or get back to, their own military's lines. Civilians don't have this. Civilians have zero resources. The only resources a civilian has when it comes to escaping an illegal restraint situation is yourself, right? There is no team coming to get you, usually. There's going to be no nation state that's going to try to help you escape from these situations. And sort of to go along with that, SERE, the military doctrine, allows for personnel to have classified military gear. There are whole radios out there, like the C-cell radio is the newest one, I think, and other RFID tags and tracking devices and things sewn into clothing and stuff like that, that the military and service members can have access to, which can aid in recovery. Whereas civilians don't have this. The civilian infrastructure, does not have the ability to classify technology from the government, whereas the government can, of course, classify things from us. So there's no such thing as owning a secret technology, right? The government is going to know about it one way or another. Another factor is that SERE as a doctrine is very heavy on assuming the capability of an aerial recovery, i.e. a helicopter coming to get you. Civilians almost never have this capability. I mean, sure, it's possible, but it's just so remote of a chance it's not even worth considering in your plan. Also, sort of along those lines, is SERE as a doctrine assumes a vastly superior firepower capability during recovery, right? So when we think of SERE in the military, we kind of maybe have this over-romanticized viewpoint of an Owen Wilson behind enemy line situation where the good guys swoop in with 5 or 6 helicopters and just lay waste to all the enemy bad guys, where the good guy makes a jump to recovery, right? Well, civilians don't have this capability at all. Granted, that's not exactly a realistic example, but during a hostage recovery, or during a some kind of hostage rescue team sort of incident, they're going to be vastly outgunning the captors, usually in that situation. Civilians can't begin to compete. There's no way that civilians now in the year 2020 can outgun the government or any other sort of source, right? Civilians can barely outgun each other, right, as we keep finding out in the news. But so if you're assuming that your rescuers are going to be able to outgun your, captors, well, that's not going to happen, even if it's, like a terror cell or something. Another thing that people tend to ignore is the criminality aspect to this. So in SERE, if no criminal activity or mistakes to be charged for afterwards, basically, if you are a lawfully sort of captured combatant in a foreign nation, serving under your nation's military, and you escape from that situation and you kill a guard during the escape, well, guess what? Your host nation is not going to kill you. Is not going to charge you for killing that guard, right? Your own nation. Now, the nation you escaped from might, but your own country is not going to charge you for murder for killing a guard during escape. Good luck doing that in the United States, even if it's in a sort of self-defense situation, even if you're being held against your will by another civilian. Guess what? You're probably going to get some kind of charge against you. The whole idea nowadays in 2020, the whole concept, the whole ideology of self-defense is up for debate, right? So especially from everybody from governmental agencies to the general public, right? Everybody is trying to debate what this term self-defense really means. So we don't have that luxury of, you know, civilians of being able to escape from a situation and causing harm to somebody else to do so. Another situation is that civilian or military forces have the ability for a diplomatic recovery. Civilians don't have that luxury. You know, no amount of negotiating with a domestic terrorist, no amount of negotiating with, say, a rogue governmental agency is going to result in your release. Once any kind of sort of rogue governmental agency or group gets their hands on you, there's no way they're going to let you up. Also, there will be no oversight by agencies such as the Red Cross. I mean, think about from the normal criminal aspect, how many times does the International Red Cross come in and inspect our, you know, disaster camps, like, you know, after a hurricane? Well, they don't. How many times does the Red Cross go into Canada and check out their sort of their quarantine camps, right? Not really that many. You know, we can't find any documentation suggesting that's ever happened. Another aspect of, you know, formal SERE doctrine is that it focuses on avoiding urban centers and avoiding pretty much all contact with civilians. Basically, you read any SERE sort of handbook from sort of the 1970s when the concept of SERE was created until today. The whole chapter is basically going to say, look, you know, avoid urban areas because if you come in contact with civilians, they're probably going to turn you in. Or it is going to be a very rare situation that you're going to come across another human being in a SERE situation and it's going to work out in your favor. In the civilian sector, we don't have that option. Usually, if there's going to be a SERE type of situation, you know, most people in America live in or near a heavily urbanized area. You know, we don't have the luxury of being able to walk for you know, tens and dozens of miles without seeing a road, right? In certain areas of the nation, certainly you can, like out in the Midwest and out, you know, Pacific Northwest and places like that, you can walk for days and not see another road or another sign of a human being. But on the East Coast, where we're located, just as a concern for us personally, you can't walk, you know, 5 or 6 miles in any direction without walking across 3 or 4 roads. So even the most remote areas of the United States are having this impact come in, and, you know, SERE doesn't really provide any information for that. Also, and lastly and most importantly by far, is the concept that SERE, as a formal doctrine, relies on the ability to escape and evade back to friendly territory. SERE assumes you are in a hostile area and you can cross a line and be suddenly behind friendly lines, right? In the civilian sector in the United States, we don't have anywhere else to go. Civilians simply don't have anywhere else to defect to. There is, despite all of the shortcomings in the United States right now, there is nowhere else to defect to. The United States is still the freest, and it's really not that free, to be honest, as we all really know by now. You know, civilians are going to have to make the choice of, do I need to escape from my home, right? You're not talking about someone's, you know, having to eject over a hostile nation halfway around the world and, you know, having that hope factor of driving themselves to get home. Well, guess what? Civilians are home. What do they do now, right? So this is kind of a lot of things to think about when it comes to SERE, and, you know, despite all of this sort of bad stuff that we've just talked about, SERE is not a perfect solution, but the overarching doctrine, you know, might not be a good solution to the problems we face, but the individual skills are sound. Really, the only factor that kind of changes with SERE for the civilian sector is that for civilians, everything is going to be significantly more difficult, require much more preparation, require much more money, practice, and gear. So basically, it's just going to be that, you know, SERE is going to be a lot harder for civilians to do or even for service members to do, while CONUS, you know, that's going to be very hard to do, because the SERE doctrine is focused around a hostile nation and getting back to friendly lines, or getting back to a point where you can be extracted. Well, in the civilian sector, who's going to extract us and where are we going to go, right? So these are just some things to think about, that when we talk about this sort of SERE stuff, and when you see all these SERE kits online, is it like, yeah, I mean, that's all well and good. Essentially, it's just restraint escape when we're talking about this stuff, because, you know, where are you going to go, right? So before we get into restraint escape, here's a few other things to think about that not a whole lot of people are thinking about right now when they talk about SERE. First one is money. Like I mentioned before, if you're ever in a situation where you find yourself needing to use your SERE skills CONUS, you're going to need a lot of money, because money and funding is going to get you 99% of the way, right? You're also going to need a long-term support network. You know, it's not like we can evade for a couple weeks at the max until we can get back to a friendly or even a neutral nation. In the United States, we might have to wait months before any kind of thing calms down, you know. We're also going to have to need, if we have to use these skills CONUS, is the ability to leave everything behind. You might not be able to return home, you know, if you find yourself sort of imprisoned in your house, right? And you need to escape, or else something bad's going to happen to you, right? You also have to have the ability to have really no family or friends, or the ability to bring them with you. And that's a huge clincher for a lot of people, you know. Another thing you're going to need is a new identity. The thing is that, like, look, you cannot be a person in, you know, really most nations without an extensive identity, not just some cheap, you know, plastic fake ID, you know, fake driver's license that high schoolers used back in the day, right? We're talking about an entire identity, an entirely new person, new social security number, new passport, new driver's license, a career, a whole set of, really, a whole life, right? And that's going to be impossible for 99.999% of everybody out there. The people that can afford it, probably not going to be watching this video, so that's just something to keep in mind as well. And then lastly, which is kind of something that we're really hesitant to talk about, is the legality of all of this stuff, right? If you find yourself in a situation where you are going to have to escape from a situation, what would a jury think? And we must remember that at the, how do I put this, at the risk of going off the deep end and sort of losing credibility immediately, we have to remember that history matters, right? And if we look back over history, we must remember that the things that human beings have done to each other, the atrocities on a mass scale, right? Pretty much every example of genocides over time, every example of totalitarianism, authoritarianism, basically the worst parts of every dystopian fiction novel you could possibly imagine, those scenarios coming true, if, you know, when they have come true in the past, guess what? That's all been legal, right? Everything that happened during, you know, in Germany and Poland during World War II, that was all legal under German law, because they made it so. Everything that was done in Rwanda during the genocide there in the 90s, guess what? That was also all legal. You know, same thing with some of the crimes going on, you know, right now in Belarus with, President Lukashenko locking down and, you know, torturing his own civilians and things like that. You know, guess what? It's legal because he's a dictator and he's declared himself to be so. So we must remember that if you're going to be using these skills, you're probably going to be breaking the law. And that's where we kind of get into a very gray area, and that's why not a whole lot of people out there are talking about what we're about to talk about. Normally what people talk about is just simple restraint escape, like duct tape, zip ties, handcuffs, you know, your basic handcuffs, right? And that's pretty much all they leave it at, because that's pretty much, you know, they don't want to offend anybody or get on anybody's radar screen by talking about something more serious. But we think, and this is the whole crux of this sort of video series, is that, like, look, talking about how to escape from duct tape is drastically underrepresentative of the skills, the situations, the tools, and the circumstances that are out there in the world today, right? It's not like we're talking about, you know, a 1970s airline hijacking where they just duct tape everybody on board. You know, those days are gone. These tools that we're going to be talking about today, all of these tools were purchased by us using civilian credentials, which is to say an email address, and, you know, PayPal or a credit card or something, and they were all shipped right to our house. None of the things we bought today, and most importantly, none of the knowledge that we've learned today, is any remotely controlled. So if we can buy it, bad guys can buy it too. And that's why we wanted to talk about this, is because not a whole lot of people are talking about some of these more extensive restraint type systems. So without further ado, let's start talking about illegal restraint escape and some of the themes and things we need to think about when preparing for this kind of situation. So the themes that we're going to talk about today, there are really 4 main points. One is that preparation is crucial. Now, some of these restraints that we're going to be talking about are pretty much impossible to get out of unless you have prepared for them ahead of time. Most of these are like that. Some of these, you can get out of them a few different ways, but mostly, if you don't prepare ahead of time, you're not going to be able to get out of any of this stuff. So preparation is crucial, right? And we're going to be talking about preparation in a separate video following this, talking about all the gear you need. So I know that everybody's probably going to be tuning into that one more because we all like gear, don't we? But this one is the how-to, and the next video is going to be the gear, just so you guys are aware. And number 2 is take advantage of vulnerabilities. We must remember that restraint escape a lot of times is like a poker game, right? You're not necessarily playing the cards. You're not necessarily playing against the tools you have. You're playing against the person using them, right? So when we get into a lot of these restraints, we're going to talk about how the human factor can sometimes be used, and most importantly, the laziness and complacency factors can be used to our advantage against an illegal restraint situation. And then lastly, think outside the box. Now, this is something it's kind of hard to teach. Well, I would think that's probably very impossible to teach, but hopefully we're going to encourage people to sort of think outside the box when it comes to these restraints, because a lot of times you've got to be very creative with how you get out of them. And let's see here, number 4, creating space during application. Now, this one is crucial when it comes to restraints that aren't necessarily like handcuff type restraints. So when it comes to things like the first set we're going to talk about, flex cuffs, duct tape, zip ties, rope, all that kind of stuff, you can create space during the application process, and that will aid in your release, because if you're able to, the way you're holding your hands will prevent you from being tightened up to the point where you can't move at all. You want a little bit of wiggle room inside all that, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. And we also have to remember the goals of the restraints themselves. What are the restraints trying to do? And really, temporary control. As any routine police officer, really in any nation in the world, will tell you, restraints are temporary. All restraints are temporary. That's why usually there's a lot of things that go into restraints, and the number one thing is never leave anybody in restraints alone. It's because restraints, all of them, can be overcome with time. And if they can't be overcome with time, goals can still be accomplished. So for instance, even some of the most high security handcuffs in the world that cannot be picked, that while you're wearing them at least, that cannot be gotten out of while you're wearing them, guess what? You can still use them to assault someone, and that can be a goal for someone in restraints, right? So all restraints are temporary, right? And we also have to remember that one of the main goals of restraints is really not to completely stop someone from escaping. That's not their goal at all. Their goal is to slow down an escape, so that by the time a subject has figured out how to escape from restraints, they're already in a higher security area, or they've already got they've already been swapped out for higher security restraints, right? So that's something that we have to remember as well. And this is what we call progressive security. I'm not sure if there's an actual term for this, but this is kind of the term that we think of it as, and it's kind of the thing we've coined ourselves. So let's talk about that concept of progressive security for a second. Now, when we're going to talk about progressive security, we're going to use for an example these style standard police handcuffs. Now, these are the Smith & Wesson Model 100 handcuffs, by far the most popular and widespread, most commonly used handcuffs in the United States. They can be bought for about 20 to 30 bucks on Amazon. They can be bought pretty much anywhere and shipped anywhere. And they're used by pretty much every police department in the United States. Now, these handcuffs are probably some of the least secure on the market when it comes to the features that they have and the ways to overcome them. But this concept of progressive security can make these small handcuffs, these cheap, non-high security, run-of-the-mill, standard handcuffs, completely unescapable. And we'll go by talking about the different ways that you can escape from these handcuffs. There are 5 main ways. I'm sure there are more, but these are the 5 that we have come up with, and these are the 5 we have personally tested and can confirm work for this particular model. So first up is a bobby pin. You can simply take a bobby pin and use that as sort of like the ability to disengage the locking pawl, right? And we'll talk about that in a little bit more in depth when we get to how to escape from these specific handcuffs. But a bobby pin being used can simply be really discouraged by a double lock, right? So, of course, bobby pins can be used to defeat the double lock as well, but guess what? It's now you've doubled the things you have to do. Rather than using the bobby pin to sweep one way to open the locking pawl, you have to sweep the other way first to disengage the double lock, then sweep back and disengage the locking pawl. That doubles the time that's required to get out of those handcuffs. So next up is a hidden key, and this is probably one of the easiest ones to identify. Is that, guess what? You know, if you have a hidden key on your person, which all of us do, pretty much 24/7. Really, the easiest way to make sure that nobody has a key on them is a search, right? So if you search a person, you search them thoroughly. You do a very thorough strip search and all that kind of stuff. You can detect most hidden keys, especially considering that a lot of these, people that are prepared for escaping from illegal restraints, the people that are going to have the plastic handcuff keys and things like that, guess what? Usually they're not prepared. They're usually not staged in such an area. So you're going to have all your escape and evasion equipment in a nice little plastic box or a nice little plastic bag in your pocket. And all somebody has to do is stick their hand in your pocket. Oh, look, those are 100% of your escape tools. Nobody usually has them layered on their person day to day. They only do it when they're in a situation which they might get taken, right? So we have to remember that even though we may have all this Gucci gear, we've got to take steps to make sure it's not found during a search immediately, right? At least by an adversarial force who's not going to search that hard. Also, being a hidden key can be overcome by putting you in a secure vehicle. If you're thrown in the back, say somebody's got like an old police car or something, right? And they're able to, slap you in handcuffs, put you in the back. Like even a criminal, right? Let's just think of it in terms of a criminal trying to escape. Look, even if they get out of the handcuffs in the back of a police car, which happens, by the way, all of the time. Even if they're able to get out of the handcuffs in the back seat, they still can't get out of the vehicle. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Is that look, and one of the reasons why progressive security just is one of those things that's easy to do. Up next is a chain break, right? Breaking the chain and we'll of course talk about this more when we get to it. But breaking the chain between the handcuffs is fairly easy to do, especially if you're handcuffed in front. You're going to be able to do that in about 2 seconds flat. But an easy way to get around that is a blue box, and we'll talk about that in a minute, or really at the end of this series out here. So that's one way to clearly make sure that nobody can break the chain. And also placement. If you put the handcuffs on behind somebody's back, it's a little harder to do the chain break thing. And all it's about is making it a little bit harder. So if you double lock the cuffs, put somebody in a vehicle, put a handcuff behind their back, you're really starting to increase the security of these simple little old podunk, really easy to get out of handcuffs. Another thing are shims, right? Well, shims can easily be defeated by double locks. End of question. There's no way to get around that, right? And another thing is these cool little micro escape saws that they can are either made of diamond or like a little tiny saw blade. They can cut through even the hardest metal on the planet. Yeah, those work, and those can cut through these cuffs, but it takes time. And that's one of the things that when you start adding all these things up, if somebody were to illegally detain you, slap some cuffs on you, double lock them, put a blue box on them, put you in the back of a secured vehicle, and then watch you, guess what? You're not going to be able to get out of there, because we also have to remember that being put in the back of a vehicle, right, impacts that as well. And then also, like I mentioned earlier, the concept that you're never alone in handcuffs. And we also have to remember that other things can be added as well. Putting a hood over your head. Like, how many people out there practice restraint escape with their eyes closed? Not that many. And then how many people also have, even own a set of like leg irons, right? Those can be easily purchased online, but not many people have them because, well, different reasons. I guess I just don't think it's worth it. But guess what? Instead of having to pick 2 locks, or really just 1 lock if you're like us, and if you're in a real situation where you have to escape, you're not going to bother with doing the other handcuff. Just, handcuff it to your own wrist, right? So that you can get away. Who's going to go out and do another set of leg irons, right? It takes time. It's all about increasing the amount of time required to get out of the restraints. That's all really these high security devices do, is increase the time that it takes for you to get out of them. Increase the time so much so that by the time you figured out how to do it, you're in another situation, you're in a different set of restraints, you're in a different holding area or whatever, right? Because we must remember that most of these restraints are made with criminals in mind, right? But they can be used and are often used against regular civilians illegally as well. Alright, so we finally arrive at our first type of restraint, and these, this is a sort of category of restraint, really, that's not really worth breaking out and talking about separately, because honestly, these are while some of the most common improvised restraints, honestly, you can get out of these with enough time and with 0 skill and 0 practice. So some of the things that a lot of people online and a lot of other far more qualified people in this subject area have talked about before are the restraints such as duct tape, zip ties, and rope. Those are the 3 most commonly used restraints by like home invaders or terror groups or things like that. And of course, it is worth practicing getting out of these. However, once you've sort of figured out how to do this, and once you've taken steps to prepare, and chances are, if you're going to be taken captive by a group or an entity that is going to only use these tools to restrain you, well, then chances are they're not going to conduct a thorough search of your person, and you can have so many tools at your disposal. So that's why this genre, this category of escape restraint is not really worth talking about. More people have already covered it already, and honestly, it's pretty simple to do. So one thing that is slightly more worth talking about are things like heavy-duty police grade, military grade, or whatever words you want to choose to describe very tough flex cuffs. Now, we had originally talked about trying to demonstrate this, but honestly, it's really not worth it, because trying to get out of these, even the most police-grade, commercially produced flex cuffs are still quite susceptible to this, just using a buzzsaw type action that pretty much every quote-unquote SERE expert on the internet has already shown everyone how to do. This is such a common way to get out of this. You can also use the popular V cutters, which we'll talk about when we get into the actual kit building part of this series. You can even use your bootlaces. You don't even really need Kevlar cord. If you have strong enough bootlaces and they're thin enough, like a normal set of military style bootlaces, that'll work as well. Paracord, the inner strands of paracord works astoundingly well, even against the most thick of flex cuffs. So that's kind of why it's like, we wanted to dedicate our time to figuring out and showing how to get out of more tough to get out of restraints that hasn't quite been covered in such detail before. So while yes, we do use these tools and practice getting out of flex cuffs and things like that, one must remember that that's once again the easiest restraint to get out of. So if you're practicing the easiest thing all the time, well, how are you going to face the more difficult restraints? So that's why we move on to more handcuff style restraints, which we're going to be talking about next. Alright, so before we move on to regular handcuffs, we must talk about kind of what I alluded to before we showed how to get out of flex cuffs, is that there are a lot of different ways you can restrain somebody with handcuffs. In fact, just using the Smith & Wesson Model 100s or the Peerless Model 700s as an example, there are 8 different ways that these handcuffs, either one of these handcuffs, can be used to restrain someone. And by far the most difficult one is the 8th one, where you have them locked behind your back, the cuffs are double locked, and the keyway is facing away from your hand, right? So up towards your arm, away from like your palms. And that is by far the hardest way to get out of really any handcuff. And we must remember, though, that even though this is the hardest way, that's the way we're going to show how to do it, there are easier ways, right? People are lazy. That's just a general rule out there. So if you can take advantage of people being lazy and, like, I don't know, not double locking the handcuffs, well, guess what? Your escape just became that much easier. And chances are, if anybody is going to be using this information that we're talking about, if anybody is going to be using that information to escape an illegal type restraint, chances are your person who's going to be taking you captive is not going to be looking at you with a with a microscope, right? They're probably going to be rounding up a lot of people at once and not exactly concerned about one person in particular, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. So even though we're going to talk about the hardest way to get out of all of these, there is still going to be a good chance you're going to have the easier way of getting out. And also, before we move into it, some of these ways you can't. Like with any pair of handcuffs, there are 8 different ways to lock them on your person. But for instance, if you have a set of rigid handcuffs that are locked to the rear, they're double locked, and the keyway's facing away from your hand, guess what? There's no way you can get out of that. So there are certain ways that, unless you are a gymnast and are exceptionally flexible, and unless you're able to get those cuffs to the front of your body, which is what we recommend, there's some ways you can't quite get out of them at all, right? And we'll talk about that when we get to those more high security handcuffs. But right now we're talking about Smith & Wesson Model 100s and Peerless Model 700s. And this is what they look like. So the Smith & Wesson on the left and the Peerless on the right. Now, we're talking about these both at the same time because they're essentially both the same exact handcuff. The only difference being kind of the general shape and the fact that Peerless keyhole is in the center of the cuff and not on the side, right, with Smith & Wessons. Now, this is interesting because on the Smith & Wessons, that keyhole placement makes it a lot harder to get out of. That keyhole being over here on the side and this other hole over here for the double lock, that makes it so much harder to get out of because you can't just put your finger on the cuff and then feel around in this one area. Because on a Peerless cuff, guess what? You put your finger in the center of the cuff and you're either going to feel something or you're not going to feel something, right? And that means, okay, if you don't feel anything, if the side of the cuff is smooth, guess what? There's no keyhole there. You flip it over, you feel on the other side. Oh, I feel a little bump right in the middle. That means, or a little jagged piece, a little depression in the middle. Guess what? That's the keyhole. On a Smith & Wesson, it's a lot harder to do because, for one, that double lock window is on both sides. It goes all the way through the cuff. So you've got holes on both sides. And let me tell you, unless you've practiced with this a lot, when you're feeling around for the keyhole, there is that double lock hole and that keyhole feel a lot alike. You have to practice many, many, many hours before you're able to determine and feel the difference between the two. Once you've practiced enough and you keep practicing, you're able to feel it instantly and know instantly what is one. But I remember all of us here looked like complete idiots because we spent hours trying to shove a key into that little double lock hole. So that's why we're not going to show how to get out of the Peerless ones. For the sake of time, we're just going to go right after the hardest ones to get out of, which are the Smith & Wesson Model 100s. And the position that we're going to be using is handcuffed to the rear, like normal, right? They're going to be double locked, so it requires 2 key turns to open them. And we're also going to have the keyway facing away from the hand, thus making it even harder to get that grip with a very tiny plastic key. So let's go take a look at that video, and I'll narrate through that as well. Alright, welcome back everyone. So here we are on the tabletop, and we're going to be taking a look at the Smith & Wesson Model 100s. So, like I said before, these are some of the most commonly used handcuffs in North America by everyone from criminals to your local police department. As it stands, these are also some of the easiest to get out of. So, A lot of people get kind of caught up in the trap of trying and practicing to get out of these handcuffs, and which is why you see these tutorials all over YouTube and all over the internet talking about how to get out of these specific handcuffs. And we're going to start off with that, but the reason that we had this whole series is because these, while they are the most common, they are not the only ones. And also, they're some of the easiest to get out of. So we run into kind of the sort of trouble that a lot of people in the sort of lock sport or beginning to get into the hobby of lock picking get into. They'll buy their first lock pick set, they'll buy their first padlock, and they'll start to pick it, and then they'll realize that they'll figure out how to pick it, and they'll be like, oh cool, this is awesome, I can now pick locks. Well, if you're practicing on a master lock, which is the most common padlock to practice on, well, that's actually one of the most easiest padlocks, as a really easiest brand as a company to get around in terms of lock picking. They're basically the easiest locks to get out of. So we all know the sort of analogy of you train to your lowest level, you perform to your lowest level of training. So meaning that if you could pick the easiest lock, well, what about the harder locks? So same thing with this. If you can pick these, that does not necessarily mean you know how to get out of handcuffs or illegal restraints at all. It just means that you're good at one of the easiest ones. Now we're talking about that being said, we're talking about the Smith & Wesson Model 100s because they are of the two most common handcuffs in America, the Peerless and these are harder than the Peerless. So we're not even going to show the Peerless because it's easy. The differences between the two, let me grab a shim right quick and I'll show you the differences. The differences between the two is that on the Peerless, the key is right here. The key is right there in the center, and that's what makes it easier because, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have this double lock slot here confusing your fingertip with the keyhole. So that's what makes them easy. And the Peerless locks, they double lock here with a pin so that you can take the back of a key and poke it, and that will double lock the Peerless handcuffs. It also makes it harder to figure out if you've actually succeeded in picking the double lock, because now right here on the Smith & Wessons you have a nice little window, and you've got that nice little slot right there that shows you, that little piece of metal that shows you these handcuffs are not double locked. And as you can see, they're not double locked. So like I mentioned before, the easiest way by far to get out of handcuffs is with a key. And there are many different ways of getting out of these. The way we're going to show today is with the bobby pin. So this is one of the most common ways to do it. Here's the thing with bobby pins. With handcuffs in general, a lot of people get bent out of shape trying to figure out how to do handcuffs with these, and this is of course a valuable skill. That's why we're going to show it today. But you also have to remember that look at what handcuff keys look like now. Look how small they have become. This is a titanium one. This is a Delta key, of course. This is the tiny inconspicuous handcuff key, our personal favorite here, and this is another generic, I think this is a Schomer Tech key, plastic key that's been cut down. It was circular, but it's been cut down to be even a little bit more small. So if you can get away with having this, you can absolutely have this. Because there's no reason why, if you're able to retain a bobby pin on your person and your kidnapper or captor or whatever doesn't take this or any other small piece of metal, a paper clip or whatever, there's no reason that they can't find this. Plus, you've got to remember, this is metal. These, or at least these two, are plastic and cannot be found by a metal detector. They can only be found by a physical search. So honestly, when it comes right down to it, all of us here, sure, these are good to have on your person, not only because they can get out of handcuffs with them, but because they are can be used to fashion other tools as well. But honestly, for getting out of handcuffs, just keep the key. There's no reason to work harder when you don't have to, especially in times of duress. And trust me, getting out of these handcuffs with them behind your back and double locked with a hood over your head, where your breathing is restricted, guess what? This is going to take a while, whereas this is going to be a lot quicker. So yeah, let's just go ahead and show some of the methods we could use to get out of these handcuffs. So obviously the first method is using a key, right? So plastic key. Now one thing you must note about plastic keys, and this is actually kind of an interesting exception right here, the Schomer Tech key here on these particular handcuffs is kind of sticky. As you can see there, it's a little, I'm trying to push it with my thumbnail, it's a little sticky. It's kind of hard to convey because you can't quite feel it, but as you can see, I'm running past a little bump there. Whereas if I take, see, even hard to get out a little bit. If you take the tiny inconspicuous handcuff key, it goes in smooth, but there's also a little bit of resistance right there. And if you take the Delta key here, let's just put that in there. There's no resistance at all. It swings really smoothly, and does that really well. So one thing you must keep in mind, this is not a factor for the Delta key at all, but with these plastic keys, you've got to be careful of the torque. So if you torque that key too hard, you could snap it off in the keyway. And that's something nobody talks about. If you snap a key off in the keyway, like in an emergency where you're trying to escape these illegal restraints, you're going to be in some serious trouble. You're going to be in some serious trouble if you're just practicing and break a key off in the keyway, which we have done several times. But yeah, that's something to keep in mind, is your key strength. So you're going to want to practice this kind of thing. You're going to want to practice. It's all based on touch and feel, how much effort is required. But, you know, obviously you guys didn't come here to figure out how to use the key for the lock, because that's not exactly getting out of it. That's just bypassing, really, honestly, or not even really bypassing. It's just using the key for the lock. You came to figure out how to use one of these bobby pins. And this one I've already pre-made, so let's go ahead and grab one here. Alright, so here I have our brand new, right out of the package, bobby pin. Sorry if that's a little blurry for you guys. Focus distance on this camera is not that great. So what we're going to do is separate it like this. Now, you don't want to bend it all the way back, because then it'll just snap, and you need this little bit right here to hang on to, because you're going to have a considerable amount of leverage. Now, I left this one like this because, as you can see here, there are little plastic bits on the end to protect people who use this for their hair, right? Well, if you see, you've got to get those off, right? Or at least on the straight side here. And I'm just doing this, and I can't, using my fingernail, I cannot pull that off. So I have to use my teeth or another tool here. So that is something to take in mind, because guess what? If you've got these behind your back, you're not gonna be able to put this in your mouth to use your teeth to do that. So that's just something to keep in mind. You might want to pre-stage these and practice this ahead of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this a certain way, because I know that this way works a lot better for me. And I'm going to insert this thing into the lock. Now, a lot of people screw this up, and they'll put this in and they'll push it all the way in. No, don't push it all the way in. Just a little bit. And we're going to bend it just like that. Now, that right there, whoop, that is perfect. I don't know if you can see how much that bent or not, but that bend is perfect. Let's see, I've got a couple others over here. This is too much. And this one also works, but it's not perfect. This one is perfect. So I'm going to stick it back in there and bend it just a tad bit more. There we go. And basically we're turning the handcuff into our own tool to help us bend that by doing that. So what we're going to do is we're going to sweep the lock. We're basically putting this in, trying to get it to where it's like that, and then slowly sweep this way, right? And until we feel that locking pawl disengage. So what I'm going to do, put it right in there, and look at that. Just that easy. And that's what happens when you have the right tool for the job. For instance, I can try this one over here, and you know, this, like I'm doing this, I'm able to look at this handcuff keyway. Imagine not being able to imagine having to do this with your eyes closed, with this behind your back. It's going to be very, very difficult to do. A lot of people think, I'm just going to keep bobby pins in my waistband and I'm good to go, right? No, it's going to take you half an hour to figure out how to do it. So having the luxury of sight just for the demonstration here, you can see how easy this works. Just come back in here. Of course, it's not going to work the second time. But you go in there, you sweep. There you go, locking pawl disengaged. And just to show you what's going on inside the lock here, see if I can do this easily. Yep, there we go. I'm going to push this in, sweep around, and you see how that locking pawl drops. That locking pawl disengages. Let's go with the teeth, and there you go. So that's how you get at handcuffs with a bobby pin. I'm sure there are dozens of others that have shown this on YouTube and easier how to do it. Oh, before I forget, the double lock. So let me grab the key. Somewhere around here I've got one. Because you have to have the key to engage the double lock. So where did it go? Where did it go? Ah, here it is. Alright. So Same way with the double lock. So as you can see here, I'm going to put it in the background so you can see there's a little piece of steel right there. That means these are single locked. I'm going to put that in there and push that feeling. You hear that big click, and then now that piece of metal has been moved into here. That shows that these keys, these cuffs are in fact double locked, right? So they won't go in and they won't go out. So what you're going to do is the same exact motion, but on the opposite side. So if they're double locked, you got to sweep this way, right, towards the outside of the cuff. And you got to do it with a pretty good amount of force. Okay, almost. All right, boom. So I swept all the way around the edge of the cuff, and as you can see, now that double lock is now not double locked anymore. So hopefully I can get my tool out, right? And then now we're just going to do the same motion with the bobby pin again, sweeping. So you can see I'm bending the tool because it's hard to do. And then there you go. It takes a pretty significant amount of force on this bobby pin. So you can see how much I bent it just in that short little demo of how to get out of these. So that's just way number one of how to get out of there with a bobby pin. It's not the preferred method because honestly, nowadays, I mean, most of the days, I never leave home without at least several of these on my person in different places strategically around my body. Just we've all done that for a very long time. Some people like shims, and we'll show you how to use shims here in just a second. And some people prefer bobby pins, just keeping a stack load of these on you all the time. I say, look, the key's easier, so why not just keep the key? Because shims, a lot of people, if you're building a kit, yeah, put shims in there. Obviously, we're going to talk about kits obviously in part 2, but shims do not work on the double lock. So let me go ahead and double lock these, and I'll show you that shims. Like I can shim this all day because the way that a shim works is requires you to click the handcuff in at least one time, and that is why double locked cuffs cannot be escaped from using a shim. Using a shim with single lock cuffs, you can see the handcuffs are single locked, which you won't know when you're wearing them unless you've been paying attention. And you push the shim in this right here as far as it will go, and then missed it once, so I screwed up on that. Now the handcuffs are tighter on my wrist, right? So practice makes perfect, of course. So now I'm pushing this in till it can't go anymore, and then I'm pushing it till it's past that first pawl. And then sometimes on these handcuffs, you have to click it once, right? And then now that shim goes all the way in. Now, a lot of people on YouTube will show this being a lot easier, and it is, I will admit. But these handcuffs are, like I said, very, very old. Well, not very old, but these are your typical handcuffs. They look like they're brand new. They're not. They're about 10 years old. So once you get that in there, it just comes right off. And what's going on inside the cuff is, like I see if I can show this locking pawl. Basically, you're shoving this piece of steel between the locking pawl, which grabs the teeth here. See if I can show you it right there. Yep. You're pushing that in between there, and that just creates a smooth surface for those teeth to bypass. Shims are great on single lock cuffs. They're sometimes they're way faster than a bobby pin, and sometimes almost as fast as the key. And in a lot of cases where these are locked on your wrist with the keyhole facing your arm and not your wrist, shims are faster by far on single lock cuffs than even using the key that they came with. But shims are not perfect. And just to show you, I know a lot of people out there are going to be asking this because, well, maybe not a lot of people, but some people are. The Russian style shim. Now this shim is for getting out of locking pawls, which are specifically anti-shim. It doesn't work on all of them, but it does work on a lot. And for us, on these particular cuffs, these are actually easier to use. So we're just going to make sure that they are, in fact, single locked. I'm going to push it right in there where it goes. Get it in the right spot. That's the trick. And then since it's got this little keyway thing on it, it's a little easier. And then boom, shove it right on in. There you go. So on these, this one's smoother for some reason, even though it's got those teeth on it, which are meant to get around specifically an anti-shim piece of metal. So here's the difference between the two in case you haven't seen the tips. This is supposed to be the #1 way to get out of these if they're single lock, but this one also works as well. So if you're going to carry a shim, you might as well just carry the Russian style one because this shim can work on more locks than this one can. And they're around the same price, so you might as well. And this particular one came with a nice little thicker keyway thing. But if you're limited on size of your kit, this would probably still be a good way to go. And you can obviously modify this one by taking a Dremel and dremeling that out. So that's how to get out of these style of handcuffs. We've used the key, we have used bobby pins, and we have used shims. Alright everyone, we've got to take a short break and come back with part 2. We want to keep these videos around to be around an hour long in length, and we've got a lot more to talk about. So we're going to be recording and uploading episode 2 here in just a second, and make sure you go ahead and click that link. I'm not going to do the full outro yet, but these are our other platforms if you want to check those out. But go ahead and go click on the link below, or the link that's going to pop up on the screen here in a second, and you'll be able to see part 2 in which we continue our series on escape and concealment.